Welcome to the final block of the personal development stream. I hope you've all enjoyed the Women's Symposium so far. I think we can agree it's been quite really energising and really positive event so far, and hopefully you've picked up a lot of interesting things along the way. So my name's Sheena Gillett, and I'm the PR and Communications Director at PIMFA, and I'll be facilitating the next hour and a half. This stream is designed to provide something different and fresh. We'll be taking a departure from the usual kind of conference format in that we'll be prioritised sessions that will hopefully appeal to you as the person as well as you the professional. These sessions will offer us a chance to be frank and probably at times have a slightly uncomfortable conversation. But these conversations are really important and hopefully we'll all get something out of it, both from a personal development perspective and also as we look towards the future of our industry. So, without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker, who will be discussing the importance of male allyship, the lovely Mark Freed. Mark has dedicated 20 years of his work at E2W, supporting women and helping us to flourish and succeed in our careers. 4 years ago, however, he became frustrated at the slow pace of change, and he recognised the imperative to get more men to help drive diversity and inclusion by helping them to fully understand the issues and the opportunities, and then went on to form Men for Inclusion. Today, Mark works with a number of firms across the industry, helping them to get more men involved in and supportive of inclusion initiatives. So welcome to the stage, Mark.
I was here for the last session, and there seemed to be more men in the room then than there are now. Have all the men gone? And to those that are still here, I can see one and maybe a few more at the back. Welcome and thank you. So, Men for Inclusion. Let's focus a little bit on the word inclusion for a little while. First of all, three things. First of all, I'd like this session to be inclusive. So, if I happen to say anything that maybe offends or you think is wrong, then I give you permission to call me out. Either now, in the room, shout, yeah, or if you don't feel up to that, afterwards. This is a safe space. The second thing is inclusion. I like to think about as being about all of us. But to talk about inclusion, sometimes we need to bring diversity into the conversation. And when I talk about it from a male and female perspective, the two genders. I recognise there are other genders. I recognise there are lots of other forms of diversity. I'm not leaving those out. I believe inclusion is about understanding and getting to know the person, not the diversity box. Finally, the difference between, one of the key differences between diversity and inclusion for me is that inclusion is something we can exercise every minute of every day. Very few of us get the opportunity to increase representation, to change diversity stats, but each and every one of us have got an opportunity every minute of every day to change culture, to change behaviours and to change values. And, sorry, we forget that. Three things about me. The inclusive world that we live in has enabled me to celebrate my dyslexic superpowers. It's stopped me being ashamed of my lack of academic qualifications. I spent the last 25 or 20 years, 25 I think, running an organisation that supports and helps women to flourish and succeed in their financial services careers. I've got to understand some of the challenges that you face every day in the workplace. With Men for Inclusion, it was formed because I was getting frustrated at the pace of change. You've only got to look at gender pay gap stats, even the latest ones, to realise we're moving forward on this agenda really slowly. But last month, coming on to what we're going to talk about, three things. Gender stereotypes, the lived experience gap rather than the gender pay gap, and how we engage men. So last month, many of us celebrated International Women's Day. Using the hashtag Inspire Inclusion. I know there are other hashtags going around, But if you look historically at where we've come here, we've come from pledging for parity, being bold for change, pressing for progress, choose to challenge, break the bias, all things which are quite forceful calls to action that highlight inequalities. That maybe the outcomes were to recruit, almost a call to arms for women to stand up and be counted and hold men responsible. What I've loved in recent years is that we're now moving to things like inspire inclusion and embrace equity, which are more inclusive. They mean all of us. They benefit all of us, and we progress together if we do that, if we follow those rules. A little bit more of a history lesson. This is my mum and dad on their wedding day. It was a day that changed their lives forever. It was March the 1st, 1957. My mother had got a career in a well-known high street bank. On the 1st of March 1957, it ended because her contract of employment stated that she couldn't stay employed as a married woman. Yeah. Her education, she had 3 choices. If she was clever, banking, accountancy, teaching, or a nurse. If she wasn't clever, a hairdresser. That's what she was taught at school. But the day she got married, society's expectations were that she'd become a homemaker, a cook, a cleaner, and a mother, a full-time mother. And societal's expectations of her was that she'd be a carer, domestic, obedient, grateful, subservient, emotional, and loyal. All characteristics that I associate with my dad. Yeah. But it changed my dad's life as well, because on that day, his career suddenly became super important because he was becoming the provider, the head of the household, the protector, the father. He wasn't allowed anywhere near the hospital on the day I was born 3 years later. The role of a father in those days was very different. You're not going to be surprised that those societal expectations of him I associate more with my mother. But in those days, you complied with those societal expectations. Today, let's move forward. You as women, and the women in the room, you've cut those apron strings of complying with outdated female stereotypes. You're in every aspect of our lives. You've got careers. In the industry, you can be astronauts, you can invent vaccines to save us from viruses, airline pilots, top sports people. But also you've got the choice to be, and the choice and the opportunity to also be mothers, or indeed to be stay-at-home mothers. The only thing that's getting in your way is men, I would suggest. And I think that is because men have not grasped the opportunities that are being put in front of us to do away with our outdated male stereotypes. We're still complying. Yeah. And until we release ourselves from that straitjacket, things are going to continue to be a challenge in the workplace for you. And we need to encourage and get more men on side. I've only got 20 minutes, so I'm not going to go into all of those things. I'm going to move on. Men for Inclusion, before we set up, undertook a load of research at Cambridge University into the different lived experiences in the workplace of men and women. And what we found, unsurprisingly, is there was this thing that we now call the lived experience gap. Your experience in the workplace is likely to be around 30% poorer than mine, purely because you're women. That experience gap affects performance, motivation, retention. It affects you achieving your ambitions and progressing. And it's caused by things that we describe now as accidental sexisms. These accidental sexisms are a cost to businesses. They're about inclusion. You'll recognise some of them on the board there. There are things that happen to you in group situations, like not getting airtime at meetings, like being interrupted more than me, by having your ideas stolen by other people. But other things, being given the admin task, being questioned and expected to provide more evidence of your capabilities. Not being considered for opportunities when you have young children. This isn't to say these things don't happen to men, it's just they happen to you in greater abundance. They're more likely to happen to you. And our research has shown that there's between a 15 and 30% gap in these. And frankly, we need to close that gap. The only way we're going to close that gap is to get more men on board, more men on side, more men engaged in the conversation. Because we need to change culture, we need to change behaviours, and we need to change values. We need to become more inclusive. So, moving on to men. Where are men on the journey? Our research, and indeed other research that's out there, King's College recently, for International Women's Day, presented some research that suggested that up to 60% of men think that DE&I has gone too far and it's now discriminating against them. Our own research has pointed that figure at about 20%. It's a significant number. By the way, King's College research also showed that 40% of women thought it had gone too far. So we're clearly doing something wrong. The vast majority of the rest of the world are passive in this. How often are we stepping forward and thinking about diversity and inclusion? How often are we thinking about our own behaviours, our own values, our culture, and the type of culture that we want? Most men are completely passive in this. They're not moving forward. Where do we want to get them to, though? And I'm going to come over to this side of the board. Allies, we talk about allies and inclusion leaders. Allies are men that are supporting and helping you to succeed in the current culture, is our definition, with the current behaviours and the current values. So if you're being excluded from social networks, if you're not involved in that football conversation on a Monday morning, an ally might explain the offside rule to you. Yeah? An ally might encourage you to speak up, to have more presence, so you're not getting interrupted in meetings. But we think that's okay, but we want to get people to become inclusion leaders. We want them to think about changing the narrative, changing the way that meeting is run. Encouraging quiet voices to speak up just means everyone speaks louder. Changing the way that meeting is run enables everybody to contribute, not just those loud voices. So our mission is to move men towards becoming inclusion leaders. But how do we do that? And where are men on the journey? So I've left my clicker behind. Where are men on the journey? What we've seen is there are demotivators for men and there are motivators. And let's talk a little bit about the demotivators. There's a pressure for men to engage, a volume of messages, being scapegoated, a lack of role models, and people feeling that there's a reduced opportunity. I'm never going to get a job because I'm a straight white guy. But let's look at those. Let's look into some of those. Being scapegoated and lack of role models. Charlotte earlier on, I believe her name was Charlotte, was talking and got a great laugh from saying men don't do the washing up. Yeah? But then a wonderful woman down here talked passionately about her husband and wanted to talk passionately about her husband, about being a stay-at-home father. And it was dismissed quite quickly. What a great role model he was. He has freed himself from the straitjacket of complying with outdated male stereotypes. Yet we ignore that because we prefer to laugh about men not doing the washing up. Yeah? Now that's good. We're in a safe space. We're in a safe room. It's fine to laugh. But if that's what's happening outside in the real world, if that's what our diversity and inclusion strategies are doing, alienating men, when we talk to a lot of men on their journey, when we first started talking about diversity, it excluded us. We didn't fit a box. And then quite often our next interaction with it was to be brought into a room and be told that we were biased, albeit unconsciously, and then aggressive, albeit in a micro way. And then we saw our organisation making huge commitments to gender diversity and recruiting more women, etc., etc. And then maybe we did put our head through the door and we're told we didn't do the washing up. Yeah? That, I think, and all these things are typically what our diversity strategies are doing. That's why 60% of men... Sorry, can I have my water? Oh, dry mouth, thank you. That's why 60% of men think this has all gone too far. Can we change the narrative? Can we change the way we talk about this? The men we talk to and the men we've researched talk passionately about these motivators, and we can engage them. I understand the benefits for me, my team, organisation, and the wider community. Earlier on, I think it was Charlotte was talking about 50 plus having time off because of the menopause. How many men want 3 months off as well? If we go to the people that make those decisions as all of us, it's going to be a lot more powerful. It's going to resound. We're going to get more advanced. Men, like the stay-at-home husband, like me, most men actually understand, if you talk to them in the right way, that diversity and inclusion isn't a zero-sum game for them. It's a motivator. How do we motivate them? How do we engage them? A lot of men identify with diverse characteristics themselves. I'm dyslexic. I come from a working class background. I haven't got an education. I'm from an ethnic minority. Whatever it is, actually, they've faced many of the same challenges as an underrepresented group as you do. Let's not put all men in this same box. Let's engage with them slightly differently. We also see, and I hear a lot when men stand up on stage and say, I'm doing this for my daughter. And there's a snigger quite often. There wasn't a snigger today around the room that, oh, he's only there because he's got a daughter. I've spoken to men who are talking really passionately about wanting to change the world because they've realised and don't want their daughters to grow up in the current world. I was talking to a guy the other day who was talking passionately about how he had taken his daughters, who were mad keen on football, inspired by the wonderful Lionesses, down to join the local football club. And how he had seen that they had been given the worst pitches, the worst kit, the worst changing rooms, the worst referees. They were sidelined. And that opened his eyes to what was happening in the workplace and changed the way he thought. I spoke to another man at a large investment manager, a C-suite, who we went through those accidental sexisms with him, and he looked at them and said, they don't happen here. That night, he went down to the company quiz night, got on the table with 3 blokes and a woman. She was immediately given the admin to do. She was given the answer sheet to fill in. That opened his eyes. We need to engage. Clearly, it's the right thing to do. There's a business case and I've got targets. But let's think about actually changing the narrative, changing the way we speak to talk about all of us and engage all of us in this conversation. How do we do that? At Men for Inclusion, we've got a methodology: awareness, desire, understanding, capability, and embedding. Awareness of male relative advantage, not privilege, because I'm not totally privileged. I have some relative advantage. Awareness of the lived experience gap. Then we spend huge amounts of time with men and women leadership teams talking about how do we build the desire in these passive and resistant people? How do we get them to engage? What are the motivators? How do we change the narrative? Once we've done that, we can move on to helping them understand and build a capability of what they can do. But the most important thing then is embedding. How do we embed this? So many, particularly leaders, will come up on stage and put the badge on of being an ally, etc., but then don't lead by example, don't follow up. So embedding is about ensuring and helping that this isn't just another workshop, another training session, that it's embedded in the organisation, that leaders and people up and down the organisation understand and care that this is a transformation, probably the biggest transformation in business and society for centuries. We need to treat it like a transformation and not a transaction. So, 6 things that I'm going to leave you with before we go to question and answers. We've got about 10 minutes left. Please, please, when you leave here, engage positively with men. Ensure that this is an all-of-us conversation. Men enjoy hybrid working, but they're not often given permission to talk about it. I was working with a board at a big insurance company. We started that desire element of the program, and it was a little bit difficult. It was a little bit challenging to get people talking. And then this man put his hand up and said to his male colleagues, I've got a confession to make. I do the school run on a Wednesday, which is why I'm late. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Not a big confession in this room, but around that board table, it was a huge thing for him to admit to. Yeah. A little later, we were talking about why the men in their business weren't taking paternity leave. And you kind of looked and you said, well, what about the role models? What are you doing to give people permission? I think if we go, most of the things that we want are the same. Let's go and demand those things. Let's make the conversation about all of us. Let's focus on motivators. Let's change the wording. Let's change the narrative. Yeah? Let's stop blaming men for all the ills in the world. I know we're responsible for a lot of them, but let's engage them and talk about being a stay-at-home father and how wonderful and what a great opportunity that is, and making that the norm rather than not doing the washing up. Celebrating the right male role models. I'm increasingly feeling and thinking that diversity is divisive. It pits us against each other. Yeah? I think we can't stop measuring it and ensuring that we're progressing. But most of us don't have the opportunity to change the representation of people from underrepresented groups in our world. But we do have the opportunity to change the culture, to change the behaviours, to talk about inclusion. And let's think and recognise that this is a transformation, not a transaction. We don't want, and when I look at D&I strategies, when I read gender pay gap reports, they're all about just a series of quite often unintegrated transactions. Let's make it a transformation. Let's see and make this a transformation project. How do we move this forward properly, well-funded way? And I would ask you to go away and think about that and talk to your organisations, talk to your firms about how we change this from a transformation to a transformation rather than a transaction. That's it from me. We have 5 minutes left for questions. I hope there are some in the room.
Great, thank you very much.